About a week after Bingley and Jane were engaged, Elizabeth had a visitor, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. After greeting Mrs. Bennet quite ungraciously, Lady Catherine demanded to see Elizabeth alone. "You must know why I've come," she said. Elizabeth was astonished. "Indeed, I do not, madam." Lady Catherine looked very angry. "Miss Bennet," she said, "I will not be trifled with. 2 days ago I learned that you were engaged to my nephew, Mr. Darcy. I'm certain this must be an outrageous lie. But still, I had to find out for myself. If you believe it to be impossible, I wonder why you took the trouble of coming so far," Elizabeth said. "Can you tell me there's no truth to this outrageous lie?" Lady Catherine demanded. "I will not be as frank as your ladyship," Elizabeth said coolly. "You ask questions I may not choose to answer. You must tell me once and for all, are you engaged to Mr. Darcy?" Lady Catherine snapped. "I am not," Elizabeth said firmly. "And will you promise never to enter into such an engagement?" said Lady Catherine. "No, I'll make no promise of the kind," Elizabeth answered. Lady Catherine stormed off angrily. A few days later, Bingley came to visit with Mr. Darcy. Wishing to be alone with Jane, he suggested a walk. Soon he and Jane were lagging behind Elizabeth and Darcy. "You are too kind to trifle with me," Darcy said. "If you feel about me as you did last year, please tell me so at once. My feelings for you are unchanged. But just one word from you will silence me forever." Then Elizabeth shyly told him that her feelings had changed completely. Her words made him happier than he'd ever been before. Then he told her how much he cared for her. She was unable to look at him, but she listened closely. Everything he said made his love more valuable. They walked on without knowing where they were going. As they talked, she learned that she owed all her happiness to Lady Catherine. She'd immediately gone to Darcy after leaving the Bennets' house. "What Lady Catherine said allowed me to hope," Darcy said. "I knew you would have told her frankly if you didn't care for me." "Yes, you know enough of my frankness," Elizabeth said, blushing. "I was horrible to you when you first proposed." "I deserved everything you said to me," Darcy insisted. "When I was growing up, I was spoiled by my good parents. I'm afraid I became conceited and proud. Oh, my dearest, loveliest Elizabeth. You taught me a valuable lesson. How much I owe you. I've tried hard to change ever since I met you." "And one of these changes was to allow Mr. Bingley to marry Jane?" Elizabeth asked. "Allow?" Mr. Darcy cried. "Let me tell you what happened. I confessed everything to Bingley. I admitted that I'd known your sister was in town, and kept it from him. He was angry, as I well deserved. But he forgave me anyway. Once I convinced him of your sister's love, he was too happy to be angry." Elizabeth smiled at how easily Darcy had directed his friend. But she said nothing. Darcy had not yet learned to be the target of laughter. It was rather too early to begin. They walked for miles because there was so much to say and to feel. Then at last, all was settled between them. Now the happy news must be shared with her family. First, Elizabeth told Jane and then her father. They could scarcely believe her. It took Elizabeth some time to explain her change of heart. Then she told them what Darcy had done for Lydia. Her mother needed no explanations. When Elizabeth told her of the engagement, she sat quite still, unable to say a word. Then she got up, sat down, and blessed herself. Finally, Mrs. Bennet said, "Good gracious! Mr. Darcy! Oh, my sweetest Lizzie! How rich and how great you will be! Such a charming man! So handsome! So tall! Please let me apologize for disliking him so much before now. Oh, my! 3 daughters married. 10,000 a year. Bless me!" Her 3 daughters' marriages did not change Mrs. Bennet's character, however. She was still often nervous and always silly. After Elizabeth's marriage, Mr. Bennet missed her very much. He took great delight in visiting Pemberley, however, especially when he was not expected. Jane and Bingley remained at Netherfield a year and then moved to Derbyshire. Jane and Elizabeth were now only 30 miles apart, which added to their happiness. Kitty visited her older sisters often. Over time, her character was greatly improved by their company. Lydia invited her also, but Mr. Bennet always forbade it. Mary remained at home, for her mother couldn't bear to be without a daughter's company. Mr. Wickham was never allowed to visit Pemberley. But Elizabeth often sent money to him and Lydia, since they always seemed to need it. For Elizabeth's sake, Darcy also helped Wickham in his profession. Georgiana Darcy now lived at Pemberley. She and Elizabeth grew to love each other. At first, Georgiana was astonished at the lively way Elizabeth spoke to her older brother. But she learned that a woman may take liberties with her husband. Miss Bingley was mortified by Darcy's marriage. But she was very fond of Georgiana. Therefore, she was always very polite to Elizabeth when she visited Pemberley. Lady Catherine was still upset with Darcy. She sent him a letter saying exactly what she thought of his marriage, and his wife. For a time, Darcy wouldn't write to her or visit Rosings. But Elizabeth eventually persuaded him to reconcile with her. The Gardiners visited Pemberley often. Darcy and Elizabeth loved them. They never forgot that it was the Gardiners who had brought them together.